Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session. I just want to do a few housekeeping things. Some of you probably already heard this. We will be using mostly the Q&A for chat. So afterwards, please put your questions there, but we will be able to see them in the chat also. It's just a little easier for us to keep track when they're in the Q&A. And if you need to use the captions today, you can click at the bottom of your Zoom screen and there is an option to show captions, and this will provide the captions for today's session. We're happy to welcome Sofia Slitskaya from Emory University and Kat Hart from the University of Georgia, and they are here today to tell us about unlocking efficiency, collaborative strategies for streamlining technical services workflows. Thanks to you both.
Thank you. So welcome and thank you all for joining us to discuss collaborative strategies for streamlining technical services workflows. I'm Kat Hart, the Assistant Director for Collections for Acquisitions and Licensing at the University of Georgia.
Of course, I forgot to unmute, sorry. And I'm Sofia Slitskaya. I'm Head of Resource Description at Emory University.
So today we're going to talk to you about the causes of silos between acquisitions and cataloging and other departments. We're going to discuss this, how fragmentation affects library organizations. And based on our combined professional experience of 50 years, we'll show you some best practices for relationships, communication, documentation, and training. And using these methods, you can establish lasting collaborative processes that are more efficient between your technical services teams. Next slide, please. So without any concerted effort, silos will naturally form over time if they weren't there to begin with by design. And you might ask, how does this happen? So one way is attrition. Gone are the days where people work for 40 years at the same job. People leave for many reasons, such as to advance their career, retirement, personal reasons, and unfortunately these days, layoffs. And when they go, their institutional knowledge goes with them. Another way silos form is fear. Fear encourages silos as employees seek to protect themselves from some perceived loss. There are many things that people fear, including losing their job, losing power or importance in the organization. So if you're the only one that knows how to do a thing, you make yourself indispensable. Losing control of the work and taking on more and new responsibilities without compensation. So basically, change in general is scary for people. A third way that silos can form is through entrenched cultural norms. And another way to state this is by tradition. So we've always done a thing this way, so it must be the best way. And tradition is comfortable and familiar. So now we're going to talk about how these are addressed in literature. Sophia?
So as good librarians, we have looked at the literature to see how our experiences align with what has been described. And as you probably all know, it has been described in both library literature and business literature many, many times. But there are certain trends that we observed in all of those articles and books that we looked through. So I want to start with the definition of silos. And while you are looking at that long quote on the slide, I want to emphasize a few things. The first one, silos are workplace constructs and mindsets. So what's important here, so it's something that exists in an organization, but it's also is something that exists in our mind. And both of those need to be addressed. And it is important to address it because, again, as it emphasized on my slide, it inhibits the efficiency and productivity, but it also reduces morale and creates a very negative work culture and environment. As I said, there are many different articles, but as we summarize those, there are certain things that became a common consistent themes, and those are that we need to work on overcoming silos, why we need to work on overcoming silos, and what strategies we can look at to overcome silos. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, we want to break them down because to allow efficiency and creativity, to boost the personal and professional development. And that personal and professional development aspect of this whole narrative is very, very important because we don't just want to improve efficiency. We want people to grow personally and professionally as they work in our organization. And that in turn will result in improved trust and morale. So what can we do? And the literature uses slightly different terminology. So that they describe very similar things, but they are named slightly differently. So we kind of summarize them. But one other thing that I want to mention here, that the literature, and we have a whole list at the end, addresses silos on many different levels. So it doesn't matter what the scale of your project is. You can work on addressing it in a consortia, you can work in addressing it in a large organization, but you can also work on it in a small department or team or between a few small departments. So most of Kat's and my examples are how different teams involved in e-resources management address overcoming silos. So it mostly is going to be e-resources cataloging, acquisitions, licensing. But the strategies that are listed here will work at any scale and on any level. And those strategies are systems thinking, and it could be called differently in different places. So the other terms that are used are organizational maps, shared workflow maps. Basically, they're trying to say the same thing. The other strategy is community of practice. And again, you don't have to call it a community of practice. And actually, in both mine and Cat examples, they're not called that. But those are groups of people who share responsibility for the same process or a workflow, but don't necessarily belong to the same organizational unit. And of course, mentoring and cross-training are very, very important. It's important that people know what other people are doing. It allows them first professional growth, and then second, the whole work becomes more efficient, and the communication and documentation. And even though they're separated here on my slide in separate categories, all of those things kind of work hand in hand and are related to one another. But what is important in all the literature is that notion that is more important to provide clear guidance and operational advice rather than speak about high aspiration or broad categories. So what we are trying to do here, not to tell you that you need to engage in other strategic planning exercise. What we're trying to do is to show you very, very simple, very scalable strategies that could be implemented on a very small scale, but still be successful in improving your workflows and your efficiency. And because the systems thinking is such an important topic in breaking down silos, we are studying with a couple of organizational structures, and we use both Emory and University of Georgia as examples. And the 2 points of that graph, not to tell you how Emory Technical Services Department is organized, but to show you that there are many, many groups that are not necessarily part of technical services that are involved in the shared governance of our resources. So the gray boxes here are other stakeholders that are not part of access and resource services. This is how we call it at Emory, but you can see that there is collection services that are separate part of the research and engagement group. And then there are, of course, subject librarians that make selections, and there is assessment. And here in technical services, those are colored, those are all part of technical services. We, of course, have electronic resources and cataloging and other services that are separate groups, but work together to achieve the shared goal. And Kat will talk about the University of Georgia organizational structure.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute. So here are the technical services silos at the University of Georgia. This entire chart is just one of 4 branches or divisions off of library administration. So the organization is much more complex than is shown here. So I've colored the traditional technical services teams to draw your attention, but at the top, we have the different departments in this division, 2 of which are collections and cataloging, but we have similar groups: organizational effectiveness, research and computational data management, the MAP government information library, and discovery and digital services, along with collections and cataloging. Collections itself is divided into 6 units, and 3 are under me: the accounting, the electronic and continuing resources, or ECR, and acquisitions. And cataloging is also divided into its own units, covering ILS management, monographs, music, serial, and special collections. Next slide, please. Okay. All of this fragmentation can have a negative impact on your data. Data becomes disorganized and accurate, or you might end up with duplicate records. Here we have an all-title search in ALMA for a bib record for the aggregator database Black Thought and Culture. This record has several problems. Bibliographically, in the upper left-hand red arrow, what should have been an electronic collection was created as a single electronic journal record. The inventory, too, down below is inaccurate, as we have an electronic portfolio instead of an electronic collection, and the inventory is needlessly duplicated. Additionally, this search is not telling us if these 2 PO lines in the upper right arrow, if they're tied to this bib record or to this inventory. Tells you that doesn't tell us if it's tied to the inventory, but it does tell you it's tied to this bib record. So that's a situation that needs to be looked at. So if you take these problems and multiply them by thousands of records, you can see that the types of data issues that are found in many large libraries that have silos. This data situation engenders lack of trust between departments, and it impedes efficient reporting. And then also resources might not get renewed, or records may not stay in the catalog much longer after cancellation. Additionally, silos create tunnel vision that can be blind staff to the impact of their work that has on other staff workflows. So as an example, I could delete a portfolio and a bib record from ALMA, but if I don't tell anyone in cataloging, the OCLC holdings may be incorrect due to the fact that my workflow may not involve OCLC. Or, for example, cataloging may download MARC records that create inventory, but they may create the incorrect inventory type because we haven't talked about it. And now the purchase order line that I created, which is of a different type, cannot be linked to that inventory. So I could go on and on giving examples of where silos cause problems, but instead let's pivot to solutions. Now, we want to give you some high-level strategies to overcome departmental silos in library workflows. First, you need to socialize the organization for the need of shared governance and improved communications across departments. This can be done by identifying a point person in various departments that share the same level of authority and or responsibility, and cultivate those relationships either with a routine meeting or have a regular coffee or lunch where you can discuss your shared concerns. And you want to develop collaborative processes between technical services teams. You need to clarify where there's ambiguity and overlap in your tasks. We want to enhance communication within and across teams. And then we want to create and maintain clear documentation about why you're doing what you do, in addition to how you do it. Sophia?
So to get started and to help us with our own systems thinking, we took that e-resources life cycle graphic that you all know very well and recognize, and we took some liberties with it. So we tried to identify various processes that are part of e-resources life cycle and see which one of those processes belong to specific units and which ones require shared governance, as Kat talked in a previous slide. And the shared governance in our definition means that various units that are not necessarily connected, they're not necessarily part of the same department or the same division, share responsibility for maintaining and managing those resources. So here you see some steps that the specific groups of people are responsible for, and sub-steps, for example, like documentation that required shared governance or approval that requires shared governance. And both Emory and Georgia and University of Georgia had some successes in finding ways to create those simple shared approach that allow the decision making to actually be shared between units. So the stakeholders here are cataloging, collections, e-resources, and acquisitions all have different colors. And then there are steps where it's a shared governance are the ones that are decided by a group. And to allow that workflow to take place, one efficient solution is to create groups. And in my literature review, they were called communities of practice, but they don't have to be called communities of practice. To create groups that share responsibilities in decision making. And we have two examples, one from Emory and one from the University of Georgia. And the example from Emory is called, the group is called CMTAG, and it stands for Collection Management Technical Advisory Group. So that group is responsible for electronic resources lifecycle. But what is interesting about this group is that it has stakeholders from various units and part of the organization. So of course, the head of collection is the chair of the group, but it has subject librarians from different subject teams. It has people from acquisitions unit. It has a cataloger, and it has a person that's responsible, the head of electronic resources unit. And you know, I've been a cataloger for a long time, and I can tell you that it was really very refreshing for me to discover that the catalogers are part of the decision making and are at the table from the very beginning of the process. Because to me as a cataloger, it helps decide on the workflows, it helps to divide responsibilities, it helps to plan ahead, because if a big collection that requires cataloging is coming down the pipe, I know about it way in advance, not when it was already purchased and licensed or subscribed to, and then I have to rearrange my whole workflow to accommodate some big cataloging project. So it is very important, and that actually happens in CMTAG, that we are discussing the issues with cataloging resources at the same time as we are discussing acquiring resources. That helps everybody in the group to make timely decisions and to adjust their workflows because they know way in advance what resources are coming. Also helps with cancellations a lot because, people are a lot better in letting you know when they purchase something new than in letting you know when they cancel something. So having catalogers at the table makes us immediately aware that some resources are being discontinued and they need to be removed from the catalog.
So here we have a snippet of UGA's Technical Services Working Group Charter. Charters are a good way to codify the process of decision-making and who is responsible for it and how you're going to communicate across departments. Here we have applied a style template to create the table of contents you see here on the navigation pane on the left. We're looking at the section that's called Scope and Activities, and this is a table that describes what activities the group will and will not do, and it's going to be different for each institution creating such a group for the shared governance. So for example, this group here at UGA is not responsible for collections decisions or approval of collection decisions. But like at Emory CMTAG, they do make those collection decisions. So what I'd like to draw your attention to is one of the most important parts of this document. It's at the bottom of the navigation pane on the left, and I'm not sure if it's too tiny if you can see it, but this basically says communications and workspaces. And this is important because this is where the charter defines how the group is going to communicate and where to store the shared files. Next slide, please. So this brings me to another important but low-level way of enhancing communication. You don't want to create too many channels of communication because then your communication is going to get out of control and things are going to get missed. There are many different ways to do this, but some places will use Slack and some will use Teams. But in this example, it's the listserv or shared email account for acquisitions. One of the challenges to overcome is knowing who is going to do what and if an issue in an email is actually even being addressed. So at UGA, we found great success in routinely reviewing emails from our shared accounting as a group and applying Outlook categories to them. So here we've created a series of numbered and color-coded categories to tag our emails, and it visually communicates to each other which unit the email applies to and the status of the email. So on the left, you can see our email inbox, and you can see the tags applied to them. But on the right, there's examples of our category groups. So the ones in purple, they represent the unit. The 2s in orange are for the status. The 3s in green are the subject, for example, invoices. The 4s in the light blue are for format, and here it's represented by streaming video. The 5s are for special groups or projects. So in this case, cataloging represents something that we collaborate with them over. And finally, we have the 6s, which are a category that's temporary. So we can move this one back and forth on different, assign it to a certain email. And then when we're done with it and we don't need to keep it, we can just put it back in the pool. So the numbers actually serve a purpose in grouping those particular categories together. And the colors are there to just make it pop and make it memorable for people. So by tagging our emails in this way, the members of the group can easily tell what's yet to be addressed, and they can even filter on these things. So it's just a really nice way of accountability. Sophia?
Here is another low very easy way to share information and create documentation that can be shared between departments. And this particular document describes Emory Library's DDA and EBA workflow, and DDA is demand-driven acquisition. Here again, we use colors to show different groups responsible for different parts of the process. And this document is shared between cataloging, e-resources, and collection management. And each group records high-level information that is important to other groups to help identify how we perform various steps. And this is just a snippet of the document. The document itself is much bigger. It includes a lot more columns, but again, the columns are color-coded, and cataloging, for example, records the information on how we manage various records from various plans, what sources we use to acquire the records, how we handle the situation where records move from candidate pool to being purchased. And again, both e-resources group and collection management group can use our technical information to help them identify those records in our ILS, or to help them to know if the books were already purchased or not, or how we're acquiring records. So this is just an easy visual way for all of us to stay on the same page and to make sure that all of those decisions are accessible to all groups that participate in managing the process or managing the workflow. Another example is the little workflow map. And again, you probably noticed that everything we're showing you is very low tech. Everybody can create it. You don't have to be a graphic designer, though Kat is. This is all very, very simple and straightforward. And when Kat and I work together, we often use those simple workflow maps at the beginning of our documents to show the high level overview of how collaborative process works and who is responsible for what step. So again, here the colors are used to show which group is responsible for what step comes after what happened at the same time. This one is also an EBA workflow, and there are some things in that workflow that done by the vendor. So those things are also shown here on this map. Again, so everybody knows and can build expectations based on the place of the workflow, based on the step of the workflow, and also immediately know which group is responsible for what step. One more example, even less technical, is just a high-level document that is shared between departments. And this document was used for the troubleshooting e-resources workflow. As you can see here, the responsibilities of each team are listed here. So it is immediately clear to the members of each team what questions they should respond to and what questions need to go to a different team. Again, this is a high-level document that shouldn't prevent you from creating more detailed step-by-step instructions, but something like that could be shared between multiple groups that manage the same process. And it's very, very easy to see, if Kat showed in the table of content, what questions belong to acquisitions, what questions belong to e-resources management, what questions belong to access services, and so on and so forth. The final example is how your documentation could also be used in cross-training. So you can use the same documents or similar documents, not just train people across different groups or departments. Again, they don't have to learn your step-by-step ways of loading records in Alma, but it would be important for them to understand what it is exactly you do. So if they need to troubleshoot, it's easy for them, but they can also be used to train public in what you do. So again, the public understands what questions to ask what team. And this document we have used for training faculty and staff at the library. What questions, what troubleshooting tickets are handled by what team. So both teams are shown here with a list of issues that they will address. And it's not that we can't, of course, we can forward tickets to each other, but this is just a simple way to cross-train users as well, so they know how the process works.
And then lastly, we want to talk about building trust across departments through accountability. And one way to do this is through accountability files such as this one, which is we call the Continuing Resources Management Spreadsheet, or CRM. And you see a snippet of it here. While the modern LSP may have built-in task tracking features, for some large institutions, migrated data will have ballooned out the tasks and made them unusable, hence the creation of this spreadsheet. The CRM tracks collection changes and the completion of all the steps that are involved in each change, from request to licensing, ordering, cataloging, authentication access, and confirming access, to invoicing. And you can see who did it and when. So it tracks the status of many different types of requests as well. So you can have new content, conversions, cancellations, trials, database asset management, platform changes, transfers, and any other institution-specific changes that you want to track. I've implemented this spreadsheet at 3 different institutions, and in each of them, the collections managers loved it for the communication that it provided on the status of their requests, because they don't have to go and talk to any particular person. They just go look at the spreadsheet and see where it's been updated last. But it can also be used to provide statistics on productivity for your team. So if over time, you've accumulated across fiscal years lots and lots of more resources. This will give you a chance to provide hard data on how the workload has increased, and it helps support making arguments for needing more staff or more resources. So next slide, please. So in conclusion, the common team structure within libraries, especially in technical services, can often lead to silos of processes as well as knowledge about our systems and our collections. The negative effects of silos can be overcome within middle management with just a bit of initiative and cooperation. Strategies include socializing the organization to the need for shared governance and improved communication across departments, cultivating cross-departmental relationships, developing collaborative processes between technical services teams, enhancing communication within and across your teams, and then creating and maintaining clear documentation about why you do what you do and how you do it. Next slide is our references. And then thank you. This concludes our presentation. We're happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you so much. We have a first question here in the Q&A, and the attendee mentions, I also love this spreadsheet, the one that you were showing earlier. Is this provided in the program materials?
The CRM spreadsheet? It is not.
The Cat Heart accountability spreadsheet.
That's right. It is not, but I can try and include some. We're actually going to do the paper with it, so I'll include the content, kind of like lists of what we put and record in there on it, to make sure that gets in the actual paper itself. proceeding.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Oh, we have one in the chat from Amanda. How does the work of a group like CMTAG affect the timeline of decision making? I can imagine people would be concerned about slowing the process down.
I actually think it's just the opposite. It speeds the process up because all the stakeholders are at the table and could discuss complexities at the same time versus going to each stakeholder in turn and waiting for them to get back to you. The CM tag meets, I think, once a month. And at that time, the collection management brings all the new requests and questions to the group. And I mean, of course, collection management has discussions with specific subject specialists outside of the meeting. But at the meeting, you know, everybody is there at the same time, at the same table. If there are any licensing concerns, they are surfaced immediately. If there are any cataloging concerns, they are surfaced immediately. And when the agendas of those meetings are shared in advance, we try to do some research. For example, the cataloging would check if the MARC records are available or if the community zone records are available. So when we come to those meetings, we usually already have some information.
And if I may add, the CRM is getting populated as soon as collection knows that they want a thing, they add it to the list. And the acquisitions or ECR team also does their investigation on the licensing. So they know ahead of time before the scheduled meeting what's going to be discussed. So they prepare for it.
Okay, and Sarah asks, what do you do about staff who neglect to fill in the spreadsheets?
I do have to admit that you do have to remind people to populate them. So if you have a routine meeting with your staff, what I like to do in my spreadsheet is where there are blanks, I like to color them something to draw people's attention, because if you just have a spreadsheet with a bunch of white cells and there's text in there and some of them and text in and some of them are blank, then you can get lost and things will not show up as much. So I take a little bit of time each week and highlight all the ones that are empty. And then I point them out to my staff in our routine meetings, just remind them to fill it out. And if somebody, if something happened in the past and a person was not responsible for that task, but they're looking and seeing that that task was done on the record or completed on the record, then they can just put today's date saying that it was done and put their initials. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly the person who did it, but just someone saying, being accountable for, I know that this thing happened. And then I often meet with them. I basically make pivot tables out of each of these sheets showing how many things are in progress and how many things are completed and how many have been terminated and how many are on hold. So we're talking about it throughout the year. So the goal is to have as many things completed by the end of the year. There's usually always a few things that need to be transferred to the next year's CRM. So I create a new CRM each fiscal year. And we are constantly looking at this document as a group. So we kind of know where things are. And I've found over the years of using this spreadsheet that people will eventually get used to it. I always get a little bit of pushback initially because they think it's like too much work. But once they get used to doing it, it just becomes natural. And then we just get so much good data out of it.
Great, we have a question in the Q&A. Documentation takes a long time to generate, even within silos. Any practical tips on how to create shared workflow documentation in a timely manner when taking into account the technical services staff are often responsible for a lot of daily operational tasks?
You want to take this one, Sophia?
Well, I can try.
Okay.
I think what worked for us, for both of us, and documentation is always a problem, and it does take a long time to complete, and things change so much that by the time you completed your one set of documentation, it's time to start revising it. However, what worked for both of us is a high level documentation. All of those examples that we showed you here, this is just like a one pager that lists high level responsibilities that can be easily shared with other groups without the other groups having to know too many details about what you're doing specifically. And even though it doesn't address every steps, it's much faster to put together, and it much clearer to other stakeholders in the process what is their part of responsibility, so they can then go and create their own documentation for that process if they have time. Kat, do you have anything to add?
Yes, and I think that it's very important that you have assigned to people that are specialists in particular workflows to create the steps, and that they should, on a routine schedule, update them as things change. But essentially, it's a shared document, but it has many authors, I guess, to put it that way. So if it is the kind of document that's going to have the kind of detail that it says, go here, do this, click on that, you know, that you have the expert in your department who does those things, write it out and be responsible for making sure changes in what they do get recorded in that. So again, that's kind of accountability, you know. Oh, you're muted.
We have another question. Thank you. We have another question regarding tips. Do you have tips for staff members, non-management, to help facilitate these processes before there is management buy-in? And also, do you have tips for seeking out managers who might be receptive?
I think if I could, I would suggest this was where the building up of relationships with people come in. So if you have like a trusted manager that you feel like you can go to and say, you know, hey, this is just really difficult. I'm having this kind of problem. Because if your supervisor is good, your supervisor is caring about what you do and giving you the tools that you need to get your job done. And one of those is making sure that the work is distributed evenly. And so if they are looking out for you, then they should be willing to assist you in developing these relationships and socializing that idea that, hey, we really need to work together. There's things that could be happening that would be smoother, and there would be less problems and errors in the data if we work together. Let's talk about what we do. I've had great success just, you know, having a weekly coffee with somebody that's either at my level or, you know, just casual work, social, you know, get together and just talking about work, but it not being like about work, just about socializing. But you can talk about your workflow issues, and that helps build rapport, and that can help people feel like, hey, we're all in this together. And if we just work together and communicate, and I really honestly think that communication and the lack thereof has been what initially has always been the problem whenever I've come to an institution. It's like people don't know what other people do, and they never talk about what they do and how they're impacted, whether it's positive or negative, by somebody in another department. And I think just sharing that, like, this is what's going on with us, and we're finding that we have this problem and we need to talk about it. I think that really is, you know, kind of somebody's got to be proactive and just take that step to just start talking, you know.
And as if I can add to it, because you know we are all people and managers have managers, I think what worked for me personally is coming to my manager with a suggestion versus complaining.
Mhm.
It's here is the problem, and this is how we can try to solve it by maybe working together with this other group of people, and that will make things simpler or faster or easier. I think when we have specific suggestions of what needs to be done, it's a lot easier for our managers to tolerate our complaints.
Thank you. And we are out of time. However, there is one more question in the Q&A. I'm going to ask it. How do you help with the fear aspect of the silo? Employees scared that they'll be obsolete or fired if they document their processes. If you want to address this real quick, we have a little time before the last session of the day.
I think that, and Sophia can chime in if she thinks differently. I think that it's really important that you praise your staff for when they're doing a good job and just tell them what a good job they're doing, because I think that if they know that they are appreciated for the work that they're doing, that fear will be somewhat alleviated. Now, I'm sure there are people that they might have hardened chips on their shoulders from past hurts from previous management. I've come across that in the past, but I think that it's important if you just treat them, as equals and show them that what they have to contribute is valuable. And that, I think that's.
And if I may, very fast, I'll add one more thing. You also want to offer them something else in place that's a lot more fun. And that usually works really well. Instead of saying, oh yeah, I document that workflow and then we can ask students to do it, you can say, we can ask students to do it because there is this other wonderful thing that you can be doing instead. And that usually helps.
Yes, I agree.
Well, great. Thank you to both of you for this great presentation. And thanks to everyone who came. There's one final session today in about 15 minutes. This Zoom room will close for the day. That last session is in Zoom room 1, and it celebrates our award winners and recognizes them. So we invite you all to sort of end your day with a little party in celebrating our award winners. And we will see you there and tomorrow. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jackie.